Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Blown Speakers, episode 44. My name is Dave Henningman, coming in from Yokohama, Japan, and we are welcoming back our very special guest, David Wells, coming in from New York City.
New York City.
Yeah, where you're kind of just visiting at the moment, right?
Yep. Moved to Miami, and now I'm in New York doing some work and for the week. So.
Okay, well, today we're going to talk about a young man he was a young man in 1973, 1968, but who came from Wales and made a career for himself in music in New York City, right? So, and it's an album we kind of got into together when we lived together in Chicago back in '97, right? So thought it'd be fun to discuss this album together. What do you think?
It's a great idea. This album was a huge kind of shift, especially considering what I was doing at the time in my life and, playing in a band, things like this. It obviously doesn't sound anything like what we were going for, and doesn't sound anything like anything at the time when it came out. And so it's like this interesting, just new exploration. I think it was came into my life, at least, at just the most perfect time. It was awesome.
All right. Okay, so we are talking about, John Cale, Paris, 1919. It was his third solo album after leaving the Velvet Underground. It was released in 1973. And David, why do you want to talk about this album?
I think, as I said before, it's like this album just kind of came into my life at the perfect time. And I think from our conversation earlier, we were already kind of getting into John Cale. We were already fans of Velvet Underground, but I think there's a very, different component of John Cale's solo work and his Velvet Underground work. And so I think we really connected with that. And at the time, I was very eager to get into all the type of music that I was supposed to be listening to as a mid-20s type, kid. And I ended up getting a book or an article. I can't remember what it was, but it had all these different, recommendations for just seminal records that you have to listen to. And so I made a list, and it was on this long, thin piece of paper that I ripped from a notebook, and I wrote all of them down on there, and I just folded it up and put it in my wallet. So whenever I was in the record store, I didn't have to rely on my memory to get a record or to look for a record. And it just so happened I was in Reckless Records on North Avenue, I think, and Milwaukee. Popped in there, which I went there at least twice a week. Flipping through records, they had a used copy of John Cale's Paris 1919. Got it. We got home, just kind of started listening to it, and it just really, I don't know, it almost instantly hit. There's there's some kind of tone to it, or the way it kind of flows through different genres and instrumentation and song structures. And I mean, without a doubt, the melodies are just so, they're not even infectious. They just kind of blend with you. I don't know what it is. It's not like you're singing them later, but when you're listening to them, you're your heart kind of skips a beat, it's it's so good. And I almost kind of liken it as it's this sonic landscape that you are invited into, because he very much through his lyricism, even though it's not necessarily a specific storytelling record, he kind of invites you in to experience it, and that's something that I feel as you're trying to, get past the, sonic quality and the melodic quality of it to try to figure out what it means, you realize it's wait, it doesn't matter what it means. This is everything I need. So I'm not going to worry about digging into it. So you just kind of ride the wave, and it's pretty awesome.
Wait, so just out of curiosity, was this when you first started collecting vinyl in Chicago, or
No, actually my vinyl collection started, I guess, when I was a kid. I collected vinyl, but then once the digital age came in, the CDs, I stopped collecting vinyl. And then I was before Chicago, I lived in Dayton, as did you. And I just walked into the record store, and there was the Atlantic Rhythm and Blues 7 double record set on the counter, and it was like $30 or something, you know. And I'm like, oh my God, I just did the math. I'm like, wow, that's like, it's only a couple bucks a record, and this is like a legendary collection of music. So I bought it. I didn't even have a record player. So then I went to the thrift store and I bought a record player for $15. So I bought a record player for half the price that I bought the record that instigated me buying the record player. And then I just started getting into it, and I started buying records all the time. And that's actually when my, like, you know, as we talked about the last time I was here, like my love for Dylan really just like, you know, like took off with the, you know, vinyl copies and things like that. So that's when I started. So that was probably 5 or 6 years before this.
Yeah, because I would often go with you on record hunts, right, in Chicago. Like a lot of great stores.
Yeah, totally. Chicago has some great record stores.
Absolutely. So, I mean, geez, how to begin talking about this? Well, let's look at the back. The back cover is kind of fun, right? So I think what you mentioned, I mean, it does certainly look pretentious, right? I mean, yes. But somehow, like, you don't really hold it against him. And I don't know, I don't really understand what's going through his head exactly. I mean, the album is it's 9 songs in about 31 minutes, right? So it's a short album. I didn't realize how short it was until
I guess I didn't know
recently. Yeah, well, until preparing for this. Like, if you asked me, I would have said it's an hour. Because the songs are so rich and there's so much information packed into landscapes, references to a lot of things, which we're not going to try to explain today, but a lot of literary references, historical references, the names of cities flying all over the place. The name of the album is related to the Paris Peace Conference after World War I, where right when they produced the Treaty of Versailles, which ultimately led to World War II, right? And he said, what he's said about this album, which I think kind of taps into that, is he called it an example of the nicest ways to say something ugly, is what he called this album, which, I don't know, I think there's some kind of relationship to how he saw all these politicians getting together to make up this treaty that was so flawed that it was going to lead to another world war in 15 years later, right? So I mean, he's commenting on that somehow. I'm not sure exactly, but that's what, like, Paris 1919 means. But
I think lyrically, there's that ambiguity of there. There's no real continuity to anything in any song. Referentially, but then there's these lines that just like pop out at you, like you remember, and you're just like, oh, that's so, like, wow, that's really cool. And I think from my experience listening to this record, I mean, at that point in my life in Chicago, things were, let's just say, interesting, and maybe not the best place for me mentally or physically, but listening to all kinds of music. But like this record I listened to on a daily basis multiple times for an extended period of time. There's not many artists that I did that with, and so there's something about the way that I was hearing it, or the way that I was relating to whatever story it was. And for me, it was kind of more like fantastical than like storytelling. It was more like it's bringing me to another place where I might not know, which in several of the song reference, like as we were, had discussed at one point, the song Half Past France, like though the lyrically ambiguous, record as a whole, the opening verse of that song is describing a scene on a train. And like, it was very distinct. And for me, a young, 24, 25-year-old, however old I was at the time, never really had, traveled around the world except when I was very young, with my family. But imagining what it's like being on a train riding through Europe in the middle of the night and stuff, and it really, though I had some desire to go and explore before this record, I really think that like that imagery and that feeling, like I really felt like it was there, or like I felt like it like transported me. And so like that sort of concept, you know, and if you wanted to really think about, or at least if I wanted to really think about it, it's like very shortly after this record, I did go to Europe for the first time. Very shortly after this record, a lot of the things that I was feeling from the record actually ended up, you know, inadvertently influencing my life, which was really interesting. So that's something that, you know, in retrospect, I can see a lot more connection to than I did necessarily at the time or knowing it at the time. But I was, you know, ready for an adventure. I was ready to kind of move on from where I was.
Mm. I mean, it's certainly a European record. Like you cannot you cannot
Yeah.
accuse this of being American by any stretch of the image. Yeah, very European, like these historical references we don't understand, which is kind of how you feel in Europe. I mean, a lot of the times anyways.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and of course,
or to understand them would just take way too much time.
Yeah. And yeah, so I could I think I see what you're saying there. Yeah. And you know, he's not, I mean, what we could say about being pretentious, like if you didn't know anything about John Cale and you just looked at this album, yeah, I could see someone feel like I don't want to listen to this guy.
Yeah.
But
like he's sitting in a wicker chair. Like what? Who has a wicker chair?
Yeah. And his whole like, you know, pose there, he looks like he he looks like he thinks he's better than you, right? But
yes.
But then immediately on the back, it's just kind of goofy, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and this was 73. But I mean, just a few years later, like John Cale's doing this, right? He's got a hockey mask. He right, he decapitated a chicken on stage. Like things got crazy as the 70s progressed, right?
Yeah.
And this hockey mask was 3 or 4 years before the Jason movies, so he was ahead of the curve on this one, right?
Yeah.
But
nice. Well, I think, I mean, just on that kind of pretentious point, like like I agree with everything you're saying, and you know, just like the idea, like even obviously the song, like there's tons of string arrangements, there's tons of, you know, those kind of orchestrations, and then, you know, it's more like highfalutin music. It's not like a regular pop record that, you know, let's say for instance, like his counterpart Lou Reed, though he went through his own dynamic exploration of sound, you know, in the end he wrote some pop records, you know, and they both, you know, departed from that. And I feel like this record has the components of pop records, but it doesn't like fit into the pop scene. And so like his records, you know, up to this point and including this were, you know, somewhat unrecognized. And I think it's unfortunate because if you listen to this and even like his first record, Vintage Violence, like there's so many archetype like indie rock structures in both of these records that didn't come to the surface until, you know, mid to late 90s, if not 2000s. And it's just like interesting to see that dynamic. And, you know, I think that's the way it goes. Like you're unknown as, you know, on the grand scheme of things, and you end up influencing people and they bring that to the surface. And so that's something that I feel like with that pretension, I don't know, I just never felt put off by it. I just enjoyed the record so much that it didn't, which I'm usually pretty judgmental about.
Yeah, his material kind of got a lot of retroactive love. So maybe because of what you're saying, because it did something he was doing, a lot of the 90s artists tapped into, right? And then yeah, kind of he's got more retroactive appreciation than he did at the time, from what I understand. But
yeah,
I mean, I wasn't there, but so that, you know,
yeah,
that's
like
nice to see that happen.
Yeah, like he definitely didn't fit into the 1973 music scene, like
you
know, or at least this record did, you know.
Well, the musicians he got together to do this record.
Oh yeah,
interesting, right?
Yeah.
So he has two guys from Little Feat, you know, who I always, you know, just thought were a Southern rock band. Yeah, I guess that is like Southern rock, country rock, but they were from LA. But the guitarist and the drummer from that band, he got Wilton from Little Feat was Lowell George on guitar, Richie Hayward on drums. From the Crusaders, which were a jazz band, right? From I didn't, but he got a jazz guy to play bass, Wilton Felder, right? The Crusaders were like a jazz fusion, jazz funk band, and then the UCLA Symphony Orchestra plays on the album. So it's a pretty crazy collection of musicians, I'd say.
Yeah. Especially the Little Feat component, which it's so interesting to think like, and this is where, I mean, and please forgive me, all Little Feat fans, if you're watching this, like, I know nothing, or I know very little about them, and to be honest, it's solely because of their name. Like, there's something about a name. It's like, okay, I don't have to bother with them. They're called Little Feat, and I just didn't really think about it. But I think there's a lot of bands like that, but they have very like strong, industry musicianship. But I just never really got into their music or never, accessed it. But the fact that he would somehow have a relationship with them, and they clearly come from totally different musical worlds, not to mention Welsh, not to mention, European, but then the New York avant-garde scene, and then back to Europe and just like, kind of disappearing. Like, how did that, I don't know. I think that would be a great story. Like, to understand, like, how did he stumble across the drummer of Little Feat? And I have to say, the drumming on this record, when it is prominent and a backbone of the song, which is a good number of tracks, is some of the best drumming, like, on any record. Like, it's just amazing drumming because it's not overplaying, it's not bombastic. At times it's bombastic, but it's not like inappropriately bombastic, and it fits the music. And he goes from a song like Hanky Panky Know How that's just total like calming C to something like Graham Greene that has this totally badass drum beat, and it's just really cool dynamic. So I think he chose wisely. I might not have chosen that, but like, what the fuck do I know?
Yeah, just before we move on from the cover, I want like everyone, when they look at this cover, to think about the fact that he's from Wales, right? His father was a coal miner, right? And his mother was a primary school teacher, right? So I mean, he's not from an elite I think he had a talent for classical music, especially the viola, and that opened doors for him, but he's from kind of a rough background, so I think that kind of adds to his dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but this is when he's not wearing the white suit or the hockey mask. This is John Cale, about that time, 1973 or so. And for those of you who don't know, he was a member of the Velvet Underground, played on their first two albums. Well, a founding member, very important member of the Velvet Underground. Got some songwriting credits, although Lou took most of that. But the Velvet songs that he gets at least partial credit for writing: Sunday Morning, the Black Angel's Death song, European Sun, The Gift, Here She Comes Now, and Sister Ray. So really some landmark songs, right? When he first arrived in New York City, before founding the Velvet Underground, he was in 1963, so he would have been early 20s. He was in the Theater of Eternal Music with Lamont Young and Tony Conrad, right? So he had an classical music background, but he was very drawn to like the avant-garde experimental stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And from what I heard, I don't want to get too into it, but part of the tension between him and Lou Reed, why he only lasted for 2 of the 4 Velvet Underground albums. Well, one reason is because he was a genius, I would say, and they're probably intimidated Lou Reed. And I think he wanted to push things into further and further experimental directions, where Lou wanted to take them, more in the direction of Sweet Jane and rock and roll. So
Well, I mean, I would argue that, like, just given his avant-garde background of, working with, all the people he did before Velvet Underground, and he was young, like, he kind of brought, I think, probably, at least sonically, the majority of the avant sound to the Velvet Underground. Because Lou Reed, like, was, he wrote pop songs, and there was like a couple chords on guitars. His voice, I mean, I love his voice, but it's not like a dynamic, vocal range. So it's like, I think with that, his viola and his kind of screeching sounds and things like that brought a lot of that edge to the Velvet Underground, and I think it would have been a very different band, obviously, without John Cale. So that's, and to think about the, history of rock and roll, at least from the 60s to now, it's like the Velvet Underground are still considered one of the most kind of at least accepted avant sound bands really kind of ever, in that, at least in that history. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. It's I don't know.
I mean, I could say I consider John Cale like rock and roll royalty, I mean, just being in the Velvets and then producing the Stooges, and most recent episode we talked about the Modern Lovers. He produced that album. He produced Patti Smith Horses, and then his solo career, which was amazing, but kind of overlooked. But all around badass. I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
So before you and I got into listening to his solo stuff, so what I would have known from him was the two first Velvets albums, right? So I was a big Velvets fan. I had the box set. I got the box set for Christmas from my mother in let's say mid-90s. And so I listened to all these Velvet albums again and again. So I loved them. But actually, before I got that into the Velvets, I had this Lou Reed and John Cale songs for Drella that came out in 1990. So I was a Lou Reed fan before I was a Velvets fan or a John Cale fan, right? So I went from Lou. I got this, and I plan to do an episode on this in the near future. Songs for Drella is a really amazing album, and it was great because they kind of, he left the Velvets on kind of bad terms, and this was, I think they tried to do stuff together shortly afterwards that didn't pan out, but then 20 years later they get together and do this, which is essentially like a tribute to a friend of theirs who had passed away, which was which is an amazing album. But
and actually kind of interesting is like, because this was a bit of a resurface of John Cale, at least into the the eyes of people that didn't see his solo work.
Yeah,
that same year he also put out a record with Brian Eno called Wrong Way Up.
Okay,
which is a fantastic record. And so it's interesting that like he recouples with Lou Reed to put this record out in the same year that he ends up a collaboration years after, he's just been kind of like, kind of doing his business and stuff, to work with Brian Eno, which obviously is another, legend in the, in the world of the underground, so it might be interesting even to like put these records, musically together and see how they kind of, how they differ or something. I don't know, maybe not. I'm not sure, but it just kind of popped in my head.
So Wrong Way Up was also 1990 or thereabouts? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And Lou kind of had like some serious late career success with New York. Like that album was huge, right? In 1989. So I'm guessing this is the next album he did after that. So that's kind of interesting too, when you think like kind of Lou kind of having a comeback, people are talking about him again, and the first thing he does is invite John back. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is what I knew of John Cale before you and I started listening to the solo stuff. Just to give people an idea where Paris 1919 falls. So I see it referred to as his third solo album, but it could be his fourth. I think one of these wasn't released.
I think the Academy Apparel was either cover songs or it wasn't his music.
Okay.
So
and I think it was also instrumental stuff. Yeah, too.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's it, because I was curious about that as well, approaching this episode, and I read somewhere that I think it was the Academy Apparel was, I think it's either covers or it's not his music, so it's not kind of counted as his a full-length record for some reason. I'm not sure.
One of these is a collaboration with Terry Riley.
That's, I think, Church of Anthrax.
Okay. And so this record label, Wounded Bird, I've come across before. So what they do is they'll go back and like find albums that were never released, like albums that were recorded and shelved for whatever reason, or they just came out at a horrible time that they didn't sell. This Wounded Bird will go back and find those albums and like repackage them and re-release them. So there might be some, that would lead me to think that Church of Anthrax didn't do proper release for some reason.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, I think it might be a combination. Now that I might have switched those records. Like the Church of Anthrax was a collaboration and might have gotten shelved. So then that's the one that didn't. So that's the one that didn't come out. I wasn't considered a record, I think. Yeah. Anyway.
But he's kind of doing, at this point, he's kind of doing what Eno would go on to do, right? Where Eno would release a rock record and then an ambient record, right? Like kind of switch back and forth between songwriter and just kind of soundscape designer. So I don't know. I wonder if he was influenced by, the fact that Cale is doing this, putting out rock albums and kind of classical or avant-garde albums. Like, of course, not that Eno needs a lot of inspiration.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think they probably had some dialogue for, certainly. And actually, as we were talking about the, kind of pretension of Paris 1990 just through the, arrangements and the strings and stuff, I started thinking, and also the musicians that played on it, which were kind of like, wait, John Cale and Little Feat? Like that doesn't sound like a combination. I was wondering if he was influenced and or knew Van Morrison, because Astral Weeks came out in 1968, and that record, fabulous record, but that record was a backing band of all like improvisational jazz musicians. And from the like, history of it, or the lore, the myth of the record is that they went to the studio and Van Morrison basically just like started howling around, and it was like a one-take record. I don't know the reality of it. I haven't dug into the history of it, but like that's what I've heard. And if you know, the record is flawless from start to finish. And oddly enough, that somebody like Van Morrison, his last real like, surfacing in the pop world or the music world was Brown Eyed Girl. And then comes this record where he has these really, really high skilled jazz musicians improvising behind him, wailing away. I think it's pretty interesting. And I wonder how, like, because not that it's a similar concept to this, but like John Cale, Little Feat, a lot of string arrangements, very dynamic nature between songs, like ups and downs and backs and forths, So I don't know, worth thinking about.
Yeah, that's funny because I was thinking about Astral Weeks when I was listening to this album, like not that specifically, but just that kind of vibe in some way, Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's like a mashup or something. There's some like, because there's something, though the record could be considered a pop record, it's very like musically, it just, I don't know. I'm not sure where it fits genre wise, or if there's a need to make it fit. I don't know, but it's definitely unique. 73 and in 2000, whatever year it is now.
Well, so I'm going to say, if you're interested in John Cale's solo material, Paris 1919 is a great starting point. You can see here it's gotten, right, 637 people all gave it 5 stars. I mean, it's considered his masterpiece. Not to take away from some, I mean, if you look at like Vintage Violence, people love.
I love Vintage Violence.
Fear, people love. I mean, it's got some, opening track, Fear is a Man's Best Friend. I mean, killer stuff. I mean, I'd be happy to talk about other, Cale albums at a later date too. But
yeah, totally. And I mean, I would say Fear is a little bit more like it's a raw. Vintage Violence is a little bit more exploratory in like songwriting, because there's a lot of goofy stuff on there, but which I love. And actually, I think Vintage Violence is a great record, because I got into Paris 1990 first and then went back to Vintage Violence, and I loved it. I don't know if I would have loved it as much if I hadn't heard Paris 1990 first.
One parallel I do see with Lou Reed, I mean, on his Rocky stuff, is he does really try to change. He really tries to make the albums very distinctive from each other, right?
Mhm.
I feel like he wants
Yeah.
each album to have a very strong identity. Like even like just looking at the covers, right? The plastic face, and then the elegant clothing, and then like his fearful looking, like it's
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, it's like kind of like, the idea of like, especially when you listen to this record, but I think, yeah, if you look at the trajectory of his career, it's like, I'm not concerned, and any, point in his career, it's like, I'm not concerned with hitting that note that everybody loves me. I'm concerned with creating something that I think is valuable and good, and hopefully other people are like me, you know.
Nice. All right. Okay. All right. Now seems like a good time to play a bit of the title track from the album. I mean, I consider this an iconic, amazing song. What do you think, Mr. Wells?
Yeah, this song, I mean, I don't think there's a bad song on the whole record, but this song, like, as soon as you play it, and when we play it, you'll hear it instantly if you haven't before. Like, it instantly grabs you, it instantly pulls you in, and it requires you to be like completely like 360 degrees involved in the sonic like sound of what's happening. It's just, and it's actually, it's not complex, but it's, I don't know, it's just like boom, it just grabs you right away.
Let's go for it.
She makes me so unsure of myself, standing there but never ever talking sense. Just a visitor, you see, so much wanting to be seen. She'd open up the doors and vaguely carry us away. It's the customary thing to say or do to a disappointed proud man in his grief. And on Fridays she'd be there, but on Mondays not at all, just casually appearing from the clock across the hall. Here it goes, la 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 la. Here it goes, la 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 la. And the church shall I come to claim you with my iron drum, la 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 la. Caravans and lots of jam, maids of honor singing, crying, singing tediously. Here it goes, la 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 la. Yes, here it goes, la 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 la. I'm the bishop and I come to pay you with my iron drum, la 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 la.
How about
I
that?
mean, that's like, that's just like, I mean, it's so, I don't know, like, it's funny because it starts out so personal and like, she makes me so unsure of myself. And, just like you're reflecting back to, the time this album came into my life, like, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like every woman I've ever known, and then like, as I'm kind of like, building through that, then it just starts not making any sense. And then he starts saying like, I'm a bishop and I've come to tame you with my iron drum or something like that. I'm not sure if I'm hitting that right on the head, but like, what the fuck is that? But it doesn't matter because it's like, it like this song, it makes me feel like, I don't know, it makes me feel like I'm on like a water slide made of memories or something. Just like this, it's taking me through this water slide made of memories and like I'm drowning Like, it's just like, it's so, I don't know, it's ambiguously powerful and cinematic at the same time. It's just, I don't know, it's fucking, it's like top notch, like top notch.
And how does that part go about she's there on Mondays, but on Fridays not at all? And I see her.
Yeah, and I think this is where it's kind of, and if I had to analyze it from a storytelling perspective, which I try not to do, but this is like a solid verse of this. It's like, she makes me so unsure of myself, and then he starts going, and then it starts not. It gets into more babbling concepts. So like, I think it's reflective of, she makes me so unsure of myself, and this is like, on Monday she's here, but Friday not at all, or Friday she's here, but Monday not at all. But then she, and like, and I think he's losing track of where he is in his understanding or memory of his relationship with whoever he's talking about, and that, like, especially as a mid-20s person who really hasn't, found, your kind of place and what you're doing and how you're doing it, just rings like eternally through your history of relationships, not just with, women, but also with anyone, like, you're always trying to like get a step above yourself, but you're not really sure how to do it, You so easily are torn down, but you so easily stand up, and it's just like it's a weird dichotomy at that age. And I'm glad I can see it in retrospect now, but yeah, it's crazy.
But when he does mention that, yeah, Mondays and a Fridays not at all, or vice versa, and something about she's in the clock down the hall or something. I actually think of a literal ghost at that moment, right? Because it just makes me think of like an old house with a creepy clock and everything, and like, oh, the ghost only shows up on Mondays, or like that, just floating by, right? And that
actually makes a lot more sense than what I was saying.
No, but I mean, I like the water slide of memories too.
Yeah, just like, well, especially because like this album was like a time capsule of my life, and I've listened to it since then, but it hasn't been something that's constantly. So like when I listen to it now, it does open up this like capsule of memories, or water slide of memories, just like in this, like this. And I say I'm drowning in it, but it's not a bad feeling. It's actually an incredibly joyful feeling. Like, it's just beautiful. Like, I love that song. I love this record.
And that's also a good example of how city names and place names and country names just float by. He just mentions Japan there from
totally. Totally.
Something about jam, and you're like, all right.
Yeah. Totally.
It's totally just glorious music, huh?
Yeah.
And you could certainly see his classical music background there, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So we've referenced it a couple of times, but where we were living when we first started listening to this album was in Humboldt Park. So I got there in I want to say November '97, and I think I stayed till the following summer at some point. So I was there 9 months, 8 to 9 months. And this is where we lived, right? Humboldt Park, which you alluded to in a recent episode. But what are your memories from this neighborhood?
I mean, as you can see, I mean, it's a very nice looking place. Like, a lot of trees. There's a big yard there. We had a huge backyard. We had a garage, and like, I mean, physically everything was nice. I mean, it was a little small for 4 people, but we were young, and that's what you do when you're young. And the neighborhood was beautiful as well. The one challenge is like Humboldt Park at that time was gang ridden, like totally gang ridden. And actually, I can't remember how long I lived there, but one day I was coming home from work, and I was walking down the street a block away. Like, I got dropped off somewhere on North Avenue, and I just walked the rest of the way to Maplewood and then down to our place. And I started noticing more kind of gangbangers than typical, and it's like, because like they never bothered us. And I was kind of curious about what was going on, and something seemed like didn't feel right. And all of a sudden I heard like 5 or 6 gunshots, and 20 people come running around the block right towards me. And I just turn around and I start running. and they're all around me, and there's just gunshots going off, and there's a guy in front of me sprinting, and he turns around and looks at me. He pulls his gun out and he turns around and he points the gun right at my face. And I must have had such a like fearful look on my face that he just started laughing. He put his gun back and he ran their direction. At that point, I darted into a backyard. And in Chicago, the backyards are all like fenced for like 2 stories. And I had to climb over that fence and like jump into the other backyard and then come home. And I got home and I was like white as a ghost. And I was just freaked out. Like my roommates instantly were like, what the fuck's wrong with you? I'm like, oh my God, I was just in the middle of a gunfight. Like da da da. And then within like 2 weeks, I moved out of the neighborhood. It's unfortunate because it wasn't a bad neighborhood, even living among, like the gangs. Like I said, they didn't bother you. Like I'm a white kid sitting, walking on the street. Like they don't care about me. They care about their business. They care about what they're doing, So it wasn't like I was ever in danger until I got in the middle of their shit, until I got in the middle of their business, So unfortunately, that's one of the very strong memories I have of that place. But it was a great place. Like it was a great location. It was a nice apartment.
So that was after I left. I don't remember. I remember you telling me that story years later, but I wasn't there for that.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, when you said they never bothered us, but do you remember when that kid stole your hat right off your head when we were walking? There was a lot of intimidation. Like they, that was, it was kind of playful, but they were.
It was their place. It wasn't our place.
Yeah.
And they wanted that to be known, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that night that freaked me out.
Yeah.
But again, that was more like he was fucking with me. Like,
yeah. But he did take your nice hat.
Yes, he did. I was like, and as we said that night, I was like, if he just would have asked me for it, I would have given it to him because I'd rather do that than be jumped.
Yeah. Well, to be clear, it wasn't violent. Like he didn't hit you or anything.
Yeah, no. But he jumped on top of my head.
Yeah. He took your hat and then he just strutted away. Like he didn't even bother running because he knew we wouldn't do anything. But what you said is this, small for 4 people. We should stress that we only lived in the first floor. Yeah. So there were 4 of us living in it was critical mass, more or less. But but it was also a fun time because the number one thing in our life was just music, right? You guys had the band going, we were listening to music, going to great shows. And what I remember, the first John Cale we started listening to was this, right? The could have came after Paris 1990, perhaps, but in my memory it was first this that we were listening to. And so this is a compilation of some of his mid 70s material, the Island years, right? Island Records. So it includes the albums Fear, Slow Dazzle, Helen of Troy, with some extras and B-sides. And this is, the albums he was doing from 74 to 75. So he was very prolific during this time. Like he was cranking stuff out.
Yeah. I would say it might be just of note, even for a sentence, to explain like how we bought this record.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was going to take me to this.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. I mean, it is hilarious. I completely forgot about this. Like, this is straight out of the 70s. I love this.
But it was still going on, like in the 90s.
Yeah, totally.
Well, you and I were always looking for a deal, right? So remember, do you remember in Dayton, there was like some, there were like these coupon books they used to put out for like students. And there was one that had like buy one, get one free from Submarine House. Yeah. We just took all the coupons and and for years we were just going to use that coupon and buy one.
I believe that will be free of charge.
Like we had no qualms about walking in there day after day and producing another. Like they clearly did that like as a promotion, like to kind of.
We just collected stacks of them. Like, oh yeah, that was hilarious.
So we were always looking for a deal. So we saw these when we were living in Chicago. I used to always see these in magazines, but I always thought it was like a scam or something. I didn't think it was actually, but Yeah, so I think I tried to look closely at these, but the writing's like too small to read. But this is from around that time, late 90s, I think, because you see like they have like Porno for Pyros and Primus and
Yeah.
stuff. So this is mid to late 90s. So it might have been one of these ones we were looking at. And I think that John Cale album was on there, if I remember correctly. We got it from one of these deals where you send them a penny and they'll send you 8 CDs with nothing more to buy ever. I don't know the story behind this, but yeah, they did used to do this. And yeah, we got some. And this is typical of the kind of album you would get from there, like a compilation album. Yeah, so I'm almost certain that we got John Cale, The Island Years through that. And
very thrifty of us.
Yeah, like I have a two CD Cars Greatest Hits that that I got through there. Let's see. So, all right, we were listening to that, The Island Years a bit, and of course we're Velvet's fans, songs for Drella I was a big fan of. But then this was the book we had on our coffee table. It could have been Chris or Jim's, but I think this is where you would have written down the list of highly rated albums. And they had a star system or a scoring system or something, and they would have given, or they did give Paris 1919 the highest score. So
yeah,
I think that explains what led to buying the vinyl.
Yeah, that's probably why. That's probably where I got all the lists from. So I just went through and picked the ones that I wanted. It was a pretty extensive list, but it's just like it was. I always, every time I went record shopping, which was like at least once a week, I would pull the list out and be like, "Oh, okay, no, I haven't got that one yet. I got to look for it." And they don't have it, Yeah. So then eventually I found Paris 1990. And I was like, "All right, sweet, check it off the list."
And yeah, so here's the track list, right? So it is funny because it does seem, the fact that it's only 31 minutes is amazing. Like, because like I said, I would have thought it was twice as long, but there's like no wasted moment on the entire album, right?
No, it's like,
it feels like
it's tight. Like,
yeah, like even that clip we played of that 2-minute clip we played of Ghost, we could probably talk about for an hour,
Yeah. So, and one thing I love, actually, we didn't get to in Paris 1919, is they have this breakdown. He does this breakdown where it's like the birds, and you feel like all of a sudden you're just on this water slide of memories. And then all of a sudden you're like in a tent, waking up, and the sun is shining through your tent in a beautiful outdoor scene, and you're stretching as the birds are chirping. I mean, it's like, it's mood. Like it creates like an all-encompassing mood, 360 degrees around your soul. Like it's there. It's just like amazing. It's just like, holy shit. And it shifts straight from that, like, more like rhythmic and like really kind of like dunk, 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 like, and he also, it's a good reference point for Velvet stuff, because a lot of his viola work in Velvet was very staccato, it's like, I'm waiting for my man, or just the whole like dunk, 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 dunk. And that's the underlying thing throughout the whole song, but it doesn't seem as menacing as it did in the Velvets, and it doesn't seem as menacing as that low, like vroom, 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 kind of coming in on top of it. Like that just makes it like all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I'm like in a movie or something. It's just like, it's amazing. Yeah.
The producer, right, Chris Thomas, right? We should certainly mention. Which, he was a young guy at this time. He was 5 years younger than Cale, the producer.
Wow.
He had already
worked with 32. Or he was 31 or 32.
Yeah. Wait, so 73. Yeah. So yeah, Cale's in his early 30s. The producer's the kid, right? He's like 27. He had already worked with the Beatles and Procol Harum. He was also involved with an album that would come out a month after this that I love, is Roxy Music for Your Pleasure. You ever listen to that? That's
Yeah, I have, but I don't know it very well.
So that's cool. I just realized that today. So this producer was involved in like 2 of my favorite albums from that time. He he'd go on to work with Elton John, Paul McCartney, Pete Townsend, the Pretenders. He produced the Sex Pistols, never mind the Bullocks. So this guy's
Wow.
a badass, the producer. So that was a good match there too. I mean, because you could see that him and Cale and Little Feat and everybody was just clicking. Yeah.
It's so crazy. Like, where did they meet? Like, how did that happen? Like, I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear that. Like, he called them something like, "Hey, Little Feat, can you come over here and play on my record?" Like,
I think that John Cale was LA based for a while. I think like maybe when because when I was talking about the Modern Lovers last week, they were he produced like 6 songs off that album, and they were supposed to go to LA to work with him again, and they ended up going to Bermuda, and it's a whole crazy story. But at that time, John Cale was based in LA.
okay.
He was also a talent scout. So it is interesting because when you see pictures of him in the hockey basketball, like it seems like he does go off the rails later in the decade. But I mean, in the immediate aftermath of the Velvets, it seemed like he was building a pretty solid career for himself, as a producer and putting out killer solo stuff, and
totally.
Yeah, he was high functioning on on certain
definitely levels. I guess no matter how much he is comfortable with being on the underground or the outside of popular culture, like 10 years of grinding away or 15 years of grinding away, it's got to wear you out a little bit, And then he just kind of like, you know what? Fuck this shit. Let me just figure out my other avenues, and I don't know how to make money. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Well, looking at tracks, why don't you just dive in there?
Yeah, so like as you look at the tracks, as you move through the record, there's a lot of things. As I was saying, there's kind of a time capsule in my life, and we mentioned the concepts of the lack of storytelling, but I think there's strong components of the record that are words and sentences and quotes that jump out at you. And I think one thing that John Cale does in this record very well is he kind of invites you in to create your own story or connection to this record. A couple examples of that, in the song Andalusa, the 4th track on the first side, one line that jumps out at me is, "You were lost once before on a day much like this." And though that might seem like a very ambiguous or, broad statement, it really declares this idea of like, if you have the connection to being lost at any point on a day like this, doesn't make any, it doesn't matter because it could be any day. And it's really about that feeling of being lost and then how you connect with it. And so he's kind of inviting you in to form and translate his compositions, his art, into what it means for you. And I think as an artist, that's probably the top level of engagement you want to create for your viewer or your listener. And another kind of similar way, but really more direct, like the song Graham Greene. And this is funny because all of these songs are so pretentiously titled, just like Graham Greene, Macbeth, but that song to me has one of the best drum beats on the record, which you talked about drums a little bit earlier. But when he first starts it out, he says you're having tea with Graham Greene in a colorful costume of your choice. So he's like, you are sitting down with Graham Greene. So oh, wait, okay, here I am. Okay, yeah, I'm here. I'm with Graham Greene. And now I get to choose my outfit and the color. Okay, and it's not just an outfit, it's a costume. So now I'm playing a fantastical role in my own head and I'm only 2 lines into the song. First the drum beat kicks in and you're like, and you're just oh my God, where am I going? And then he starts asking you to create the scene. What color outfit do you want to wear? Sorry, what color costume do you want to wear? And that's something that I don't feel, or I can't at this point think of another, artist or experience that I've had with the song that's asking me to actually create the story. And I think that's very powerful when you're talking about being a consumer of art, And so the artist actually engaging you in that process, kind of like he's, guiding you through this dream, but he's giving you the choices, like, choose your own adventure kind of thing.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
And it's just like, it's something that's, I think, very unique. It's very unique, and like, as I kind of go through the track list and how each song kind of like kicks in, because they're so different. Even like, the song like, Macbeth, you would think like, I'll be a little transparent here. I'm not like super deluxe Shakespeare person. Like, I'm not gonna be able to sit here and read a Shakespeare play and analyze what's happening. To be honest, especially in high school, I didn't really have it. Wasn't my thing. Okay. So you would think like traditionally a song like titled Macbeth would be this kind of like highfalutin, Shakespearean sound, but like with like, I don't know, harpsichord or something. And this song kicks in with this like rolling, bombastic, just like, it just takes you over instantly. And it's so different from the record, because you're like, the record's been like rhythmically and sonically and has these strings and boom. And then all of a sudden this song comes on, it's like, and it's just like all in your face. And then the vocals kick in. And I think, as we discussed, like John Cale's voice has a certain sensitivity to it and is a little bit, could be perceived as pretentious. But in this song, as soon as it pops into this rhythm, it's almost like, it's like dancing on top of the rhythm, like popping popcorn or something. Just like it's not like firing at you, but he's getting through it in his delicate way. Yet the song is very bombastic. And I just think like that's something that's just like, I don't know, just like totally out of place. And like, why would you put that song on this record? But then it fits perfectly. And it's just like, I think that's where there's that strong push and pull throughout this whole record. And, though I would say, if I had to, marry one side of the record over the other, I would marry side 2, but I would gladly cheat on side 2 and side 1 regularly.
Wearing your costume, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the colorful costume of my choice. See, it's me that's making the decision. It's not you.
Yeah.
It's not anyone else. Like, I'm making that decision, And then I'll say, lastly, lyrically, another, kind of pocket that jumps out at me. And I mean, we had, some discussion around this, is this idea of like, in the song Half Past France, which I'd probably say, if somebody put a gun to my head right now and said, you have to pick your favorite song or I'm going to blow your head off, I would say it's Half Past France. Though I might change my mind the next time they put the gun to my head. But there's one line in there where he, like comes out. It's a beautifully, like orchestrated song. It says like, we're so far away from home where we belong. And like, so it's not like we're so far away from where we belong. That could have been a very simple way for him to say that. But he said, we're so far of home, in almost like parenthetically or in quotes, like home. This is a place that you recognize and you're connected to. And that's where you belong. And not to mention the way that he delivers like that line in his melody is absolutely perfect. But just what it's saying really at that time resonated to me. And I felt like, I talked earlier about that kind of adventure concept, or like, I want to get out and I want to, like, I don't feel like I belong where I am, which was in Chicago at the time. Like, I want to get out and I need to get out. And I'm not saying that line made me do it. This is my life made me do it, but it's something I connected to so strongly that like, yeah, like I want to find where I belong, and it kind of set the seed, at least at that point where, at that time, it was like within, a couple of months of getting this record, I go to Europe for the first time. And then within a year of this record, getting this record, I moved to New York. Like, I don't know, like I said, it's not because of this record, but I just think it just kind of had this, weird, like retrospectively, I can see this connection between how I was feeling and what I was hearing and what I was thinking to what I wanted to do with my life. I spent a lot of my time, especially at that point in my life, but even before, like letting other people make my decisions for me in a way, where I wasn't very proactive about my own decision making. And then all of a sudden I was like, shit, I gotta find that place that I belong, So it's like, I don't know. I think retrospectively, I've been thinking a lot about that, like through this record. So it's kind of cool. But anyway.
Yeah, mid 20s is a good time to hear this record, because I don't know if,
totally.
if you were 15 or 16, it might be, yeah, a bit challenging. But
totally.
But when you're 25, it's just like, oh God. I like what you said about just the opening lines. Of course, Graham Greene, but then Half Past France. Doesn't he say, I guess I'm happy I'm on this train or something like that. What is
Yeah.
So
I
it's,
can't remember the exact line, but yeah, there is this kind of like,
I guess I'm happy. I
yeah,
guess
like
it's all
there's,
right I'm on this train or something like
yeah,
it's
there's
not.
definitely a sentiment of like, I'm being introspective, or I'm feeling separate from my surroundings, or I'm,
Mhm.
like, as I said, that kind of like, it's kind of confusion and ambiguity, but it's like some joy of being alone, or some like, I'm encapsulated in my silo, or my, solidarity, or my whatever it is, but like I'm alone right now.
Mm.
And there is some, I don't know, sadness or to it, but there's also some contentment,
Mhm.
and that's something that I feel like is a good place to be, especially in that time of your life, because when you're trying to figure yourself out and make your own decisions, it's better to kind of pull away and have to make your own decisions, and embrace that kind of loneliness, not aloneness, but loneliness.
Well, if you see the train as a metaphor for our journey through life, and for him to say, I guess I'm happy I'm on this train, makes you think about whether or not you're happy. And you and I must have clearly thought we weren't, because we both split in Chicago.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Hmm. So it's a very thought-provoking album, and it hit us at a very good,
Yeah.
perhaps the perfect time.
Yeah. And I think just that idea of it being thought provoking, it's not thought provoking the same way. And I'll reference like someone like Dylan that I was on the last time with Dylan. Like he's instigating that, but like with this, I think he's asking you to instigate that. And I think there's a really and obviously I love Dylan. There's nothing I think it's perfect the way it is, but like this is a different approach, and so I think that's kind of interesting that like he's really asking us to fill in those blanks for ourselves rather than him telling us.
Hmm. So something that's really hitting me now as we're talking about this, what I had never thought about before. So of course, when I moved to Chicago, late '97, I mean, we were all over Neutral Milk Hotel, right? So I still remember the first time you played me Avery Island, right? And I was just like, oh my
Yeah.
God. And that just blew my mind. And an airplane comes out, and we saw them play in Chicago. Like, just, I mean, they were so
Yeah,
huge in our lives at the time. But look at the parallels here. I mean, so you have Holland, 1945. Here you have Paris,
yeah,
1940. Like, I mean, kind of similar like vibe going on between these albums, which I
yeah,
hadn't thought about before. Lyrically, and just the way these images are kind of thrown at you and you have to put them together. Like, I never
yeah.
really thought about that connection. And what's that album or the line you said from Andalusia? Or I'm sorry, was it from Half Past? You quoted a line.
Yeah, I did both. I said we're so far away from where we belong, which is half past France, and then you were lost once before on a day much like this.
Okay.
That was Andalusia.
Now, as soon as you said that, that made me think of Neutral Milk Hotel, right? This isn't the first time. In fact, this is twice in a row, right?
That's like one of the best lines in the history of music.
Yeah,
like,
and it's just belted out of the perfect part of the song.
Yeah,
that's like a
and
similar...
he sustains that note for like
Mm.
I think it's like 45 seconds. And it's just, yeah, that's always been probably like, if I had, again, if I had, go into my head, I'd pick one line to listen to. Like that is such a great, the way he delivers it, everything about it is fucking amazing.
Mm. Wow. Yeah. So even on top of, us being the right age, kind of in the right kind of mind frame of uncertainty, as a primer for listening to this, we had just blown our minds on Neutral Milk Hotel. So that's and
to think, as you mentioned kind of inadvertently, but like the idea of, it's very similar the way he approached storytelling. Is like he wasn't going to tell us the story, even though you can kind of pick up pieces and stuff, but in the end nothing really makes sense, similarly to this record, and all of a sudden, like you have to piece it together and be like, what does this mean to me? And so it's like again, asking you to come into my music and actually analyze it for yourself, and then make your own connections, because like I got enough to do. That's not my job.
Yeah. And I think a good example of that is Hanky Panky Know How, right? You're pulled into this beautiful song, which I think a lot of songwriters, if they created this beautiful bit of music, they would make sure that the chorus was like something that they were going to be remembered for.
Yeah.
And he takes you there, and then he just says, hanky panky know-how. Like he just says nonsense. He beautifully leads you into this just nonsensical region.
And that could be one of the most like elegantly and softly beautiful songs ever written. Like it's just so perfect. And I don't know if you ever heard Yola Tango's cover of that song. By no means do I think it holds up to this one, but like it's a similar, Yola Tango has that drony, really long, melodic sense as well. And like they take this song and just like almost do nothing to it except play it, which it was probably the best choice if they were going to cover it, because I don't think there's a way to make it better. I always like cover songs when they make them better. I always like Jane's Addiction for that. They made their covers were so good. They were uniquely their own. They sounded so different. Like from the Grateful Dead to the Rolling Stones, so, all the different types of bands. So but like this, I think the song is so beautiful. Like just the melody just carries you away on a dream, and that's it. That's all you need.
Well, one more Nutrimilk Hotel connection I jotted down, because when you were talking about Paris 1919, the song, I just referred to it as Ghost, right? Because Ghost, la la la. But then like, wait a minute, that's a Nutrimilk Hotel song. That's not a.
Oh right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
I mean,
it's
it'd be interesting to. Maybe next time if I run into Jeff, I'll ask him about that.
Yeah. Or it could all just be happy coincidence, but
totally.
Cool. Antarctica Starts Here, I think, is interesting because his voice is the first time on the album, I'm gonna say, correct me if you disagree, but the first time on the album where his voice sounds like that. I think he's really kind of whispering it, like really softly. Where does he do that on any of the tracks leading in?
I feel like I feel like Endless Plane of Fortune, you might whisper a little bit. I can't remember now, but like I have to say, like that's, if I had to pick the least favorite song, Endless Plane of Fortune is probably it, but it might be my favorite song title. Like that's just such an endless plane of fortune. Like, oh, like I'm not even sure what. Like I feel like that's like, it sounds like a novel already. I don't
Totally.
Yeah, but like it's like Antarctica Starts Here is definitely it's interesting because you would think as a last song, especially on a short record, it would be more of the high energy. I like the fact that it's not, and it's very slow, and it's almost like setting up, when you watch, sitcoms from the 80s and there's only 2 minutes left. It's not going to finish. And it says to be continued. And like, it's almost like the way this ends. It's like, he's like, and Antarctica starts here. And then it ends. And you're like, wait, hold on. Wait, am I supposed to do something else? Am I supposed to like, and so, it's almost like this idea that like, it's a great outro. It's a great exit. It's a great kind of like releasing you from the, the like enveloped feeling you've had this whole time. And it does it in a very delicate way, which I don't know if it was, intentional or thoughtful according to what he was thinking, but that's the way it makes me feel.
And when you consider the album starts with him, as a child home in Christmas, right? In Wales, right?
Yeah.
Which I guess the title is a reference to Dylan Thomas, but we're not lacking literary references on this album. But,
no.
But
or like geographic locations or European, journeys or
history and but it's I mean, you started this recognizable place, right? Christmas, childhood Christmas, and then you end Antarctica Starts Here. You end like facing Antarctica in front of you, like that's it's quite a distance.
Yeah, and I want to actually, I think it's a good point to bring up. It's like, we've talked about, we came across this record in our 20s and perfect timing and everything. And, this, there seems to be a little bit of a highfalutin, as we say, kind of, pretentious zone. And as a 24 or 25-year-old, you're not necessarily in that zone. But I always remember when we would sit in my room in that place in 1354 North Maplewood, and in the song Half Past France, when he's talking about his thing, he's like, I hope old Holvik knows his way around. And like, we both would like laugh. I mean, every time. It wasn't just once, it wasn't twice. Every time we listened to that record. I hope old, or like old Fulvig knows his way around. He's no fool. And we're just like, of course he's no fool. His name is Holvig. Like, I mean, the guy's got to be a genius. Like, and we would just laugh about that. And so like, there's still that youthful kind of like silliness. I'm just like, hey, we're still kids and we're enjoying this on a cerebral level, but at the same time, we're also enjoying this on a goofy, let's make fun of life level. And I think that says a lot, where might not have been the intention of mentioning Holvig, but was a great kind of, point. I remember when I think of Paris 1919, I think of a lot of things, and that's definitely on the list.
Yeah.
Holvig.
Old Hol. It's spelled HOLLWOG, right?
Yeah.
Holvig.
I hope he knows that old Holvig knows his way around. He's no fool.
He's no fool. Like, it's so comforting when we're first worried about him, but then he's like, he's no fool. He's gonna be fine.
He's gonna do his job.
I think you even declared that you wanted to name your future son Holvig.
Yeah, I might have. It didn't happen. Lionel ended up being the name of my son, but and I think it's probably better because especially when you have kids, you have to do it with the partner, or generally, at least in my situation, I did it with the partner, and I had to, I had to balance. Holvig didn't make the list. But I'm very happy with Lionel.
Lionel's a beautiful name. Yeah. A lot of character in that name. But I did look because of course I thought of Holvig. Yeah, because when I look at how it's spelled, it's different from how we said it. I looked that up on that genius.com, lyric analysis thing. And they say it could have been a reference to this guy named Theobald von Bethmann Hollweg, who was a German chancellor in 1914. And there was a long explanation, but he made some mistake or whatever because again, we're talking about Paris 1919. So Germany 1914, it would relate to that. And this guy Holwig must have made some mistake, because at the end of the long explanation, they said, oh, he was a fool after all. So,
and that's where I think, and I don't know if we mentioned this here when we were talking, but I think some of that pretension could be softened by the fact that I think he is kind of making fun of it. And if you want to take it into the notion of the, treaty or, whatever the, Paris 1980 is named after, it's like, if this person was a fool and he's saying he's no fool, like maybe he's just kind of like playing into the notion that like, this wasn't a good idea. And in retrospect, you can see this wasn't a good idea, and he was playing into that. Maybe, I don't know, like I said, don't get too into the analyzation of it, but like that just kind of popped out, it could be definitely a lead.
Okay, well, as you know, I can't talk about John Cale without showing this photograph, which I also showed in the previous episode, because we were talking about him as a producer of Modern Lovers. But so I went to see John Cale just a couple years ago in Tokyo. Tokyo Blue Note, which is usually like a jazz kind of a dinner theater type place. My friend Hiro and I we were just kind of dawdling, kind of slowly leaving after the performance. And we were the last fans to leave the place. And just as we're leaving, John Cale was standing there, and he was and he was cool, and he talked to us a bit. Hiro made him smile, because Hiro was kind of braver than I was. So Hiro's like, Hiro was really kind of, praising him. And we got a smile from John. And luckily my friend Hiro is a photojournalist, right? So he had his big, nice camera with him, and I was able to get this photo with John Cale. And as I said, I'm a great admirer of his. So this photo, or this digital possession, I would say, is one of my most treasured possessions. And I
that's
think,
nice.
I
love his little, like, I don't even know if you can call it a soul patch. It's like a soul rug. I've always been curious about those, the impetus behind growing those.
I love his expression here, because he's always been so, photo. I think, Velvet Underground were a very photogenic band. I mean, the photos of them always look so cool. And a lot of photos I've seen of John. So I like that. I like that here he kind of has that cool rock star face on.
Yeah.
Even though
then he also kind of looks like he could be your like distant uncle or something.
Yeah. Even though I look like all giddy and everything. Oh my God.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, that's a great picture.
And he played a couple songs, that night he played a couple songs off Paris 1919. So he opened with Endless Plane of Fortune, and he played Hanky Panky Know How. But he when he plays live, they don't sound anything like the album from my experience, right? Like, I mean, he mixes it up a bit. But yeah, and he played some Velvet songs, did the Jonathan Richman cover, like a good mixture of stuff. But so how about in your case? You've seen him perform a couple times?
Yeah, I mean, well, I've seen him twice, and it was actually 2 nights in a row. It was actually in the tail end of my time in Chicago, so I was very immersed in this whole world of John Cale, as we've got to know through this last hour or so. But he was playing with, he was opening for Susie and the Banshees, which already by that point was kind of like a weird, like, I didn't have a good relationship with Susie's music even in the early 80s. I was never a fan, really. And for no particular reason, it just never really hit me, She obviously was part of a huge scene, and, I love a lot of the bands in her scene and things like that, but just, I never clicked with it. But John Cale was opening, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to go see this. So I bought tickets for both nights, and because of just the nature of my situation, I went by myself, And it's not often that I go to concerts by myself, but I've been to many concerts by myself, because that's not going to stop me from seeing somebody. Like, I saw Chuck Berry in a basement in St. Louis, 25 years ago, and it was like one of the greatest shows I've ever seen. So, you can still have fun at a concert by yourself for those people that are like, oh gosh, like, why would you ever do that? Anyway, and I remember it just being like this, almost like mentorship of like, I was so excited, and I just sat there and I just watched him. And then as soon as he was done, to be honest, like, no offense against Susie, but I just left. I just went home because, I was just like, okay, I'm done. Like, this is all I need, and he played 2 probably like 35-minute sets. I don't know what the set list was, honestly, but I remember just like it kind of being a nice like seal on my kind of experience with that record, with that time in my life, with everything. It was very close to me actually leaving and going to New York. So that was yeah, it was just awesome. It was at the Metro, so Metro. Iconic place to see.
Yeah, where we saw Dylan.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, I think it's time to start thinking about what song we want to play going out.
Actually, and I will say just one last thing is that it was kind of I ended up seeing every one of the Velvet Underground members except Sterling Morrison live. So I saw Lou Reed live, I saw John Cale live, and then I ended up seeing Mo Tucker live in a bar in Chicago. And that I also went to by myself. And the Plastercaster, which if you're unfamiliar with her, she was the one that did an art project in the 60s and plaster casted all the rock stars' dicks. And so she did a spoken word to open the show, and then Mo Tucker's band played, and they were very kind of punk rocky, but they played a couple of Velvet songs. And that was awesome because she's just an awesome person. But what was odd about that show is 10 years later, I was living in New York City, or I was living in Brooklyn, and I ended up putting an ad out for a roommate. My roommate came in, we ended up getting to know each other, and he's a musician. I'd played with a lot of bands. He was playing in Mo Tucker's band at that show.
Wow. Wow.
Crazy coincidence. 10 years later, he's my roommate and he was at that show. So we crossed paths, in 2 different lives, basically.
Wow.
So it was pretty cool. So anyway.
Wait, where did you say that Mo Tucker show was? What?
It was at a very small bar. I can't remember, Shuba's or It was like on the north side. I think it's Shuba's. I can't believe I pulled that out of my ass, but yeah, I'm pretty sure
that name rings a bell for me too.
Yeah, it's like a small kind of bar that is weird because it's generally a sports bar, but they got a lot of cool acts there.
Yeah. Getting Mo Tucker in there is pretty impressive.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Wow.
Maybe we should do 3 Feet High and Rising because we saw De La Soul at Cubby Bear. Remember that?
Yeah. Cubby Bear.
We should think about that because that's an awesome record.
Mm.
I actually just recently got a reissue that on vinyl. So awesome.
We could do that. I was just as you were going to say. I was going to say we should do a Mo Tucker solo album. Right? I haven't really heard those. I mean, have you heard her albums?
No.
Huh.
To be honest, I haven't. Yeah.
Be interesting to.
I mean, I just went just because I was like, oh, I've seen Lou Reed, I've seen John Cale. I want to check them out. Obviously, Sterling, I'm never going to see, but
Wow. So just like the few months, like I left Chicago and you hung out for a few more months. It sounds like those few more months were pretty eventful.
Yeah. It was, especially when I decided to move on, because then I was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna reap all the benefits of the city. I'm gonna go out wherever I want. You know what? I don't give a shit if anyone's with me. I'm just gonna go. And I'm gonna love it. I'm gonna explore things. I'm gonna go random. I would just go out for a bike ride and I'd be like, okay, today I'm gonna ride up to the Biograph Theater and watch a movie at 7. So I've got from 12 to 7 to get there. And I just ride my bike up the ocean, up the lake, jump in the lake here and there, stop at the beach. It's it was great. It was a really kind of great conclusion to my 2-year stint in Chicago. It was beautiful.
Okay. Though this is an album and an artist we could talk about forever, I think for our purposes here now, we could wrap this up. Okay. Thank you, David, for joining us.
Absolutely.
And so you have a song in mind you thought we could play going out?
Yeah, I think, we talked about pretty much all the songs on the record, but I think I plugged a lot of the Graham Greene song. I think it'd be good for people to make that connection between, those kind of pulling you in and making your choices. And I would say, as you're listening to the song, make sure that, when he asks you about your color costume, you make a very thoughtful choice and pick whatever it is, but it's really up to you. So let's kick into the song.
Let's do it. I think I'm just going to play the whole track. All right.
Sounds good. It's a good song.
So please, okay, everyone, thanks for joining us again. And have a great night. This is Graham Greene.
You're having tea with Graham Greene in a colored costume of your choice, and you'll be thought in high esteem if you're seen in between, stiffly holding umbrellas, catching the fellas, making the toast to the civil servant Carruthers, making the others worse than most. You're making small talk now with
the drums are awesome.
And the elegant ladies in waiting. You're very nervous, they can all tell. Pretty well, they can tell. So save yourself for the hounds of hell. They can have you all to themselves. Since the fashion now is to give away all the things that you love so well. Oh, welcome back to Chipping and Sudbury. You can have a second chance. It must all be like second nature, cutting down the people where they stand.
God, that bass line is sick. God, awesome.
According to the latest score, Mr. Enoch Powell is a falling star. So in the future, please bear in mind, don't see clear, don't see far. When the average social director mistakes a passenger for the conductor, it's So shocking to see the old tragedy looking down on you and me. So welcome back to chipping and soldering. You can have another chance. It must all be like second nature, chopping down the people where they stand.